Prince Harry doesn't just stir the pot anymore. He is the pot, the fire underneath it, and the steam cloud fogging every palace window across the UK. His latest interview has been received like a ticking time bomb, not for the information itself, but for the calm, cold, calculated way he delivered it. There's something chilling about a man who claims he's only after peace while hurling verbal grenades at his own family. The contradiction is impossible to ignore. One moment he paints himself as a truth-telling warrior. The next, he plays the victim card as if the world is against him. What makes this even more explosive is how Harry seemed almost smug in his delivery, speaking as though his words were gospel, while every line revealed another layer of manipulation. This wasn't the rebellious prince people once sympathized with. It was a man who thrives in chaos, who understands that the louder the contradictions, the more the spotlight stays on him. And while many expected shocking revelations, the real shock wasn't in the content. It was in the strategy, the way Harry disguised PR theater as personal truth, leaving even his critics stunned at the audacity. One of the most eyebrow-raising moments came when Harry made subtle yet cutting remarks about King Charles. He never directly claimed his father's health was failing, but his words painted a vivid picture nonetheless. The focus really has to be on my dad. To the casual listener, it sounded like concern, but to anyone paying attention, it was a carefully crafted implication that the king may not have much time left. And that's where the cruelty seeped in. Because genuine concern doesn't come wrapped in a thin veil of strategy. Genuine care doesn't arrive after years of public attacks, lawsuits, memoirs, and docuseries aimed at dismantling your own family's credibility. Harry wasn't just dropping a hint, he was planting a seed, one that ensured his father's health became part of the global conversation. And whether intentional or not, the timing couldn't be more ruthless. To suggest frailty in the monarch, while simultaneously presenting himself as the caring son, isn't love, it's image management. It's a PR stunt disguised as sentiment, and the public knows it. You cannot spend years torching the palace from the outside, then expect anyone to believe that suddenly you're lighting a candle of compassion from within. What Harry did was take the most private of fears, illness, mortality, vulnerability, and turn it into a tool. And in that moment, people saw not the son of a king, but a strategist cloaked in manipulation. If his remarks about Charles weren't enough, Harry doubled down by making it clear he has zero regrets. None. Not for the Oprah interview that blindsided the royals, not for the Netflix docuseries that turned family strife into entertainment, not even for that infamous memoir that overshared everything from royal frostiness to literal frostbite. He framed it all as part of his journey, insisting he wouldn't change a thing. Yet here lies the contradiction. In the same breath he insists he loves the UK, he relentlessly trashes its people, its institutions, and its press. It's like a man setting fire to his home while simultaneously insisting he's proud to live there. The words don't line up with the actions, and the inconsistency is glaring. What he paints as honesty feels more like provocation, as though he's daring the public to challenge him. And in doing so, he pushes the narrative that he's untouchable, a man so firm in his convictions that regret has no place. But viewers know better. No one who is truly at peace with their choices feels the need to repeat how little regret they have. The constant reinforcement is the tell. It's not confidence. It's insecurity in disguise. Another striking element was the way Harry once again leaned on his identity as a veteran. He did serve, and no one disputes that fact. But the way he frames his service now feels less like remembrance and more like branding. Time and again, he's photographed beside war memorials, eyes cast downward with a sorrowful 1,000-yard stare, speaking softly about sacrifice. On the surface, it appears respectful, but when those images are broadcast alongside his latest sound bites about truth and resilience, the intent becomes clear. Harry is not just remembering the fallen, he's using their legacy as a backdrop for his own PR strategy, standing among the graves of actual heroes, then weaving their sacrifice into a narrative that ultimately centers on him doesn't land the way he hopes. Instead, it comes across as camouflage, a way to borrow valor that isn't his to claim. And the public, particularly veterans and their families, see through it. Sacrifice isn't a prop. Grief isn't a stage accessory. And when Harry poses in somber silence, only to pivot into another self-serving interview about how misunderstood he is. The disconnect is jarring. This isn't reverence, it's theater. And while he may convince some, many others feel insulted that someone born into privilege would use the struggles of real soldiers as cover for his own endless drama. Perhaps the most delusional claim in his latest remarks is Harry's insistence that the British people still support him. According to him, he feels the love and the backing of the public whenever he steps foot in the UK. But reality paints a very different picture. Public events that once would have drawn crowds now barely gather a handful of curious onlookers. Venues that would have echoed with cheers for the young prince are now eerily quiet. The disconnect isn't because of tabloid lies, as Harry insists. It's because people are simply exhausted with the performance. Every visit back to the UK feels less like a homecoming and more like a badly rehearsed play. One day, he insists he's done with royal life. The next, he appears in full royal fashion, waving and smiling as though nothing has changed. It's a seesaw of contradictions, and the audience has had enough. You can't keep burning bridges and then expect fans to cross them to greet you on the other side. And yet Harry seems blind to this reality, clinging to a version of public support that no longer exists. Even when Meghan wasn't center stage, her influence was obvious. Harry proudly quoted her one-liner, "When all else fails, fall back on the truth." On its own, it sounds powerful. But coming from two people whose relationship with truth has been, at best, flexible, the irony is deafening. This is the same couple who once had to issue a public apology in court for misrepresenting facts. The same couple who has been caught in contradiction after contradiction, from personal anecdotes to royal communications. So when Harry invokes Meghan as some kind of prophet of honesty, it only adds fuel to the skepticism. Truth for them has become less of a compass and more of a tool, something to bend, stretch, and reframe, depending on what fits the narrative at the moment. And for the public, that's exhausting. You can only hear truth misused so many times before the word itself begins to lose meaning. What ties it all together is Harry's ongoing hero complex, one that flips back and forth between victimhood and bravado. On one side, he presents himself as the misunderstood warrior, bravely standing against the monstrous forces of the British press and royal institution. On the other, he collapses into the role of the wounded child, forever scarred, never understood, constantly begging for sympathy. The performance shifts depending on the audience and the day, but it never feels consistent. One minute he's the tough prince who has no regrets, the next he's the broken son still haunted by his mother's shadow. And people are left wondering, which one is it? Because it can't be both. The problem is that Harry wants to occupy every role simultaneously: victim, rebel, hero, martyr, but in trying to be all of them, he ends up being none. Instead, what emerges is a man so tangled in his own contradictions that even he doesn't seem sure where the act ends, and reality begins. This cycle of shifting personas has become the defining feature of his public life, and it's wearing thin. Of course, behind every headline is the fractured reality of Harry's family ties. Reports suggest his brother, Prince William, doesn't even allow Harry's name to be mentioned in certain rooms. Friends and relatives who once stood by him are silent now, worn down by years of public accusations and thinly veiled insults. And yet, Harry still speaks as though reconciliation is just one conversation away, as though a long list of relatives is waiting with open arms. That fantasy might soothe him, but reality doesn't lie. The bridges have burned, and the smoke has long cleared. What remains is a chasm too wide for quick fixes or staged apologies. And the sad truth is that every time Harry speaks out, the possibility of mending that divide becomes even smaller. Harry insists he's only correcting false narratives. But how many times can you correct the same story before people realize you're just rewriting it? Every interview, every memoir, every statement tweaks the details slightly, reframes the villains, and sharpens his role as the misunderstood hero. It's not truth-telling, it's storytelling, with Harry as both author and protagonist. And the public sees it. The constant retelling isn't about setting the record straight. It's about keeping himself in the spotlight, ensuring the narrative never truly ends. Because the moment it does, so does the attention. And for a man who claims he doesn't care about public opinion, he spends an awful lot of time chasing it. In the end, Harry is no longer the young boy who captured the world's sympathy, walking behind his mother's casket. He's become something else entirely, a man lost between roles, clinging to relevance through contradiction. One moment, he's the rebel prince tearing down the palace walls. The next, he's the misunderstood victim pleading for understanding. Then suddenly the righteous hero claiming to fight for truth. And in trying to be all three, he's lost the one thing that once defined him: authenticity. The myth of the brave prince who stood up to the system has collapsed under the weight of his endless contradictions. What remains is a performance, one that grows more exhausting with every act. For supporters, it's disillusioning. For critics, it's repetitive. For the public at large, it's simply tiring, because you can only cry truth so many times before people stop listening. And Harry's tragedy is that the more he talks, the less people believe. He can continue rewriting, reframing, and retelling, but reality doesn't bend forever. The question now isn't whether Harry will reconcile with his family or win back public support. The real question is whether he even recognizes how much of himself he's lost in the process.